Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar on the Second Chance Act grant solicitation for FY 2013 Adult Mentoring Grant Program. My name is Leah Kane. I'm the Deputy Project Director for Reentry at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The CSG Justice Center administers the National Reentry Resource Center in partnership with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and we are pleased to co-present today's webinar with our colleagues from BJA, who will provide an overview of the mentoring grant solicitation that was released earlier this year. We'll be hearing today, I believe, from two staff members in the Bureau of Justice Assistance. I think you'll be hearing first from Dr. Gary Dennis, who is the Senior Policy Advisor for Corrections in BJA, and I think you'll be hearing later from his colleague, Thurston Bryant, who is the Policy Advisor for Corrections in BJA. Together, Gary and Thurston manage the Second Chance Act grant program and are really the lead advocates and heroes of the Second Chance Act program in BJA, and we are grateful to them for making time in their very busy schedules for today's webinar. I'll give you just a little bit of background about the Second Chance Act. I think many of you are familiar with the Second Chance Act, have heard about it over the past few years. It was first signed into law in 2008 and authorized a slate of federal grant programs that assist state, local, and tribal governments and their nonprofit and community-based partners in developing programs, policies, and practices that are engineered to reduce recidivism for people returning from prisons, jails, and juvenile facilities. The first Second Chance Act awards were awarded in fiscal year 2009, so we're coming up on the fourth year of Second Chance Act grantees this year. Second Chance Act funding status is still uncertain for the upcoming year. The Omnibus Appropriations Bill is still up in the air. Second Chance Act has been funded at a different level every year for the past 4 years. The most recent year, Second Chance Act received $70 million, which will probably be the starting point for the negotiations this year. We're anticipating that the final funding measure will end up being somewhere between $55 and $63 million for Second Chance in the upcoming year. Once that initial appropriations level has been determined through the congressional process, then the Bureau of Justice Assistance will work with its partners in OJP, including the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, to carve out those funds into specific grant programs, and those funding levels will determine which solicitations are released next year and how many grants will be available to be awarded. On the screen in front of you is a link to the National Reentry Resource Center newsletter. We release new announcements every time a new Second Chance Act solicitation comes out. We often will also send out announcements about other funding opportunities in the Department of Labor or Health and Human Services. And we send out a monthly newsletter that highlights the latest news, research, events, and funding opportunities in the field of reentry. What you see on the screen, I don't think you'll be able to actually click on the hyperlink to go to this link, but if you aren't able to write it down and save it, you can always go to www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org, and right on the front screen there that you get to on that landing site, on the top left-hand corner is a box you can use to register for the NRC newsletter. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dennis, and he's going to provide some more information about the solicitation and the specific application requirements.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for participating. We've already pulled a little joke on you guys. This is Thurston Bryant, a policy advisor with BJA, and I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Gary Dennis. I'm going to go through the PowerPoint slides for this webinar, and then at the end, Gary and I are going to both answer some of your questions that you might have. This is the first time that we have actually administered this solicitation since fiscal year 2011. And during that time, since this is the only section of the legislation that we provide federal funding awards directly to the nonprofit organizations, that, of course, was the solicitation in which we received the most applications. During that time, back in 2011, we received probably about, it was over 400 applications, so there was a well and robust anticipation for applicants submitting and wanting to receive federal awards under this section of the Second Chance Act. As mentioned, the eligibility for this section is for nonprofit organizations. Sometimes we do receive questions, inquiries from the field about what does that entail. It does not necessarily mean that the nonprofit organization has to be defined as a 501c3 status. However, it still remains the responsibility of the applicant to provide any sufficient information in case there's just some kind of question that we might have whether the entity is actually a nonprofit organization or not. Sometimes, as we often say, that since you're the ones who work in those organizations, you're going to have a better understanding of whether you meet that criteria or not versus myself or Gary. Note that this solicitation that we administer is actually for adult mentoring programs. The only section of the Second Chance Act that we administer, BJ, that has both adult and juvenile connotations is the career technology solicitations. So if you have any interest in juvenile-related mentoring programs, please contact our partnering sister agency within the Office of Justice Programs, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and you'll see that there's a link there where you can access the main web page for that organization. Regarding the goals and the objectives of this program, a lot of the information that you'll see that we'll go through for the most part will be similar to what we did in 2011. Once we get to the specific requirements and the priority considerations, that information has changed somewhat, as well as some of the requirements and some of the actual materials that you'll need to submit with your application in order to receive funding from us. The goal of this program is to promote more effective and successful reentry programs for individuals through the establishment and maintenance of pre- and post-release mentoring relationships. The objective of the program or the solicitation is to establish or improve the administration of mentoring programs, and you'll see there is a couple of bullets on what this would entail. The expansion of mentoring strategies and program designs, enhancing and improving the organizational capacity, the system efficiency, and the cost effectiveness of mentoring programs, improving training programs and support for mentors, and improving outcomes for participants in the mentoring program. Under the solicited categories, there are two categories which applicants can apply under. This was similar to what we did back in 2011. The first category is more of a general category where you apply to provide mentoring to adult individuals in a general basis. The second category is basically for fatherhood or motherhood type programs for mentoring. And also note that you can apply for one or the other, but you cannot apply for both of the categories. Regarding the target population for this adult mentoring program, there's some information on the different types of subsets that you can apply under for each of the categories. For example, the target population must be individuals who are 18 years old or older, convicted as an adult and imprisoned in a state, local, or tribal prison or jail. The population needs to include those individuals in terms of federally recognized Indian tribes. Individuals may be housed in a tribal, regional, county, or local jail pursuant to state or local tribal law. The applicants must define the specific subset of individuals and justify the reasons for electing that target population. And then the applicants must provide the likely minimum number of people that the project will serve and provide evidence that they will have that many individuals released from the facility during the time frame of the project. Under Category 2, regarding the target population, again, the individuals must be 18 years or older, and also in terms of they need to be who are convicted as an adult or imprisoned in a state, local, or tribal prison or jail facility, and also they must be the parents of minor children under Category 2, since we're referring to motherhood and fatherhood programs. And then in the second bullet, you'll just see like a listing of different types of special needs that the target population might entail for this category. And I won't read all of those, but you can see that information there. Now, as I mentioned, some of the specific requirements have changed somewhat from when we first administered this program back in 2011. And what we'll do is we'll kind of spend a little bit of time going through all of these. First of all, for these programs, there must be both a pre- and post-release services or treatment services for all the individuals under the mentoring program. So it must occur in the pre-release setting, within the correctional facility, and also it must continue as these individuals transition back into the community during post-release. Also, a specific or mandatory requirement for this year is that there must be a MOA or a memorandum of agreement between the nonprofit organization and the correctional facility that they're going to collaborate with. And so when we say a MOA, what we're looking for is not a letter of support. We're looking for something that's stronger than just a simple letter of support from the correctional facility. So the applicant needs to be able to establish a collaborative relationship with the correctional agency, and then also be able to provide specific information that basically can demonstrate that collaboration and partnership with the correctional facility. The applicant will also need to provide transitional services to assist in the reintegration of offenders back into the community. They need to also plan a timeline for recruiting mentors, including the number of mentors will be recruited, and also provide a list of the community partners that will be engaged in recruiting of the mentors as well. Continuing on to the next page, under the specific requirements, the applicants will need to provide an outline of the training curriculum that will be provided to all the mentors, as well as planning for the tracking of program participant outcomes for at least 12 months following their release from the correctional facility. And then lastly, all applicants must provide baseline recidivism rate information for their proposed target population for their projects. Under the priority considerations, previously we had a lengthier list of some of the priority considerations. Some of that information has been moved to the specific requirements, so now we only have two priority considerations. One is that under the priority considerations that the applicant could include a plan to implement activities that have been demonstrated as effective in facilitating successful reentry programming. And then the second priority consideration will be that the applicant provides for an independent evaluation of the project that could include as a feasible a random assignment for individuals who are participating in the program. The amount and length of the award period. Awards under this program will be made for a period of up to 24 months with the possibility of no-cost extensions. No-cost extensions are exactly what they say. We don't provide you with any additional funding. We just, based on the justification information that you provide us, our programs office will extend the project period for your award. Contingent upon the availability of funding and the number of projects that we receive, or the application that we receive, we will make awards of up to $300,000 for each project. And also contingent upon the availability of funds and the number of applications received. We had envisioned making as many as 25 awards. That number is not set in stone, and as Leah indicated earlier, with the current budget outlook, we don't know exactly how much money we're going to have to manage at the end, so that number might change in terms of going up or down. It just all depends on how much money we have. The last bullet point there is something that is bolded just so that you're aware of. Because of the current budget situation and the fact that the costs are entailed from peer reviewing so many applications, what is probably going to happen is that we will administer this solicitation this year, but then based upon the number of applications that we do receive, we might not administer it next year. And what we would do is we would go back and look at all the different applications received this year, make awards for next year. This is similar to what we did under fiscal year 2012 last year. Although we did not administer new solicitation, we had so many applications that we received. As I indicated, it was over 400 applications. We just basically went back to the list. We re-tiered those applications and went back to the list, and then we made new awards. So this is probably going to happen again next year. So if you are interested in applying for this program, the adult mentoring program that BJA administers, it is highly suggested that you go ahead and put in an application for this year, because it's very highly likely that we will not administer this again next year. It will be like every other year, granted funding availability. The next two slides are alternate funding and other resources. Oftentimes, Gary and I receive a lot of inquiries from the field, from you, from individuals who are just looking for other resources or just looking for funding in general. And since, as I mentioned, this is the only section of the legislation that we provide funding directly to nonprofit organizations, we oftentimes receive a lot of requests for information. So what we've done is we've kind of put a couple of bullets here about some additional funding resources that you might not be aware of and some other information to assist you. The first one is make sure that you're registered with the National Reentry Resource Center. As Leah indicated, if you're registered with the Resource Center, if you go to the front page on the lower right-hand corner, there is a hyperlink that I think all you have to do is provide your email address, and so that will ensure that you receive any updates on funding opportunities, not only from BJA, but from some of our other federal partners as well. So please, if you have not already done so, please go ahead and register with the Reentry Resource Center to receive any potential future funding activities and information. Also, a lot of you are already aware of grants.gov. That's another mechanism to kind of keep you current and updated on what resources might be available in terms of funding opportunities. The second bullet is funding available from other federal agencies. Beginning this year, what we did was we put about a paragraph on pages 3 through 4 of the solicitation as an example of some of the other agencies that might have funding opportunities or training and technical assistance to assist you. Myself and Gary, as part of BJA and some other OJP agencies, we are a part of the Federal Interagency Reentry Council Staff Working Group, which is overseen by Attorney General Holder. And currently, that working group has, I believe it's over 20 federal agencies who are involved in collaboration and partnerships for various types of reentry activities. So these agencies are focused on several different components of reentry, such as our partners at the Department of Labor, who primarily focus on employment opportunities. But keep in mind, the Department of Labor, some of their federal awards are actually to the nonprofit organization, which will include faith-based and community organizations. Some of the other reentry resources that you might not be aware of are from HHS, Health and Human Services, HUD. There's training and technical assistance that NIC might provide. There's some substance abuse and mental health reentry funding opportunities under SAMHSA. So we always encourage you not only to not just put all your eggs in one basket with this program, for example, because there might be some other programs out there that you're not aware of, so you can kind of address some of your different types of needs for the individuals that you're serving, whether it be employment, housing, substance abuse and mental health, etc. The third bullet here is that although this is the only section that we administer where nonprofits can receive the funding directly, one thing to keep in mind is that if you have an existing partnership with a state or a local government agency or a tribal entity, one thing that might make you a little bit more advantageous is to receive funding as in a secondary role is to come in as a sub-grantee for those awards. For example, we also administer the Adult Section 101 demonstration projects, and in that regard, the eligible applicants are state, local government agencies, and tribes. So if you have an existing partnership with those correctional facilities already, they would submit for the award to receive the federal award. They will be responsible for whatever programmatic materials need to be administered, but then you would be a sub-grantee and will receive funding through them to administer different types of treatment services. So that's like another example of how you might be able to receive funding or other types of resources. On the second page of this, we listed funding foundations in the philanthropic community. Please be aware that there is an increasing role of foundations to assisting with funding assistance. If you look on the cover page for this webinar, there's a listing of a couple of foundations who we've collaborated with, which include the Open Society Institute, the Public Welfare Foundation, and the Annie Casey Foundation. Those are just like some examples of some of the potential foundations that might be able to assist you with additional funding opportunities. The next bullet is the Federal Staff Working Group list. I talked about the Federal Agency Staff Working Group that BJA and other agencies belong to. But if you look on the National Reentry Resource Center's main website, on the left-hand side, there is a hyperlink to the Federal Interagency Reentry Council. Once you go to that web page, if you look at the bottom, there's like a list of different PDF information that you can examine. But if you look at the bottom, there's a listing of a staff working group. My name and Gary's name are listed under BJA. but there's also listings of other contacts for other federal agencies. So as an example, if you have an interest in reentry funding opportunities regarding employment with the Department of Labor, what I would do is I would look on there and see who that point of contact is and just send them an email or give them the call. As I mentioned, Gary and myself, our names are on there, so we oftentimes receive calls from individuals who are still within facilities. We receive calls and email requests from individuals' families, as well as from nonprofit organizations or other types of entities as well. So we always reach back out to them and provide them information to help them out. So if you're not aware of that working group list, please take a look at that, and that might be able to kind of help point you in the right direction. The third bullet here is this is a web link for some materials that we created. It was a couple of years ago, but I don't think a lot of you might be aware of it. It's basically like a mini academy to assist with writing a potentially successful grant application. So if you go to that link on the BJA website, there's like a lot of good information on there to kind of help you with some specific helpful hints on how to submit a good application for different programs. It's not going to give you any tidbits on how to submit a successful application specifically for any type of program, but still might be some good information to digest. And then the last bullet on here is the actual topic page for mentoring programs under the National Reentry Resource Center. If you go to that web link, there's a listing of archived information and webinars that have already been conducted for mentoring programs, as well as some, just like a lot of other additional information to assist you. The one thing that is not on here that I wanted to also mention is that another thing that we did new for this year is that on page 7 of the solicitation, we have a listing of some unallowable uses of funding. And so those would include prizes, rewards, such as monetary incentives, client stipends, gift cards, vehicles, and food and beverage. So please take a look at that. I'm sure there might be some additional follow-up questions that you might have after digesting that information in the solicitation. And as indicated earlier, myself and Gary will be happy to assist you at the end with any questions and answers regarding that. The next section is on the selection criteria for the solicitation. And basically, the selection criteria just basically shows you how information on the different subject areas will be weighted. So the statement of the problem, all information pertaining to that will be weighted as 20%. And this is all going to be weighted in terms of how your application is scored by the peer reviewers. The program design and implementation will be weighted 30%. The capabilities and competencies will be 30%. The impact, outcomes, and evaluation and sustainment information, as well as that will include some of the performance measure information that you provide. That will be weighted 10%, and then the budget information will also be weighted 10%. So I'm going to go through this kind of quickly, just because a lot of this information is verbatim from the solicitation, and also it's just basically going to be a mechanism for you to kind of summarize and provide detail on all the different requirements of the solicitation. So under the statement of the problem, the applicant is going to be required to describe the problems with individuals who are returning to their community. They will be required to provide a baseline recidivism rate for the proposed target population, indicate the jurisdiction of the tribal community that will be served, and summarize the basic components of their reentry initiative. As we continue on with the statement of the problem information, applicants will need to describe the existing continuum or menu of services within the pre- and post-release settings for the individuals who are going to be participating in the program. There's a couple of examples there that I won't go through. Also, they will need to describe how the proposed mentoring program will interface with the existing reentry process. Under the program design and implementation, the entity needs to ensure that they describe the project implementation plan overall, provide information that identifies the number of mentors who will be recruited, the timeline for recruiting the mentors, and a list of all the different community partners who will be engaged in the recruiting mentoring activities. In addition, the applicant needs to be able to describe how the proposed project will provide both pre- and post-release services for all the individuals who are participating in the program. On the next page, there's some more information in terms of the additional information needs to be provided under the program design and implementation portion of the selection criteria. Describe transitional services, describe the training curriculum, that will be provided to our mentors. Describe how the project incorporates an effective correctional practices. Describe how the project could be broadly replicated, and describe any of the priority considerations, how they have been met with the project. Under the capabilities and competencies, there are three main things that the applicant will need to be able to provide. The first is to describe the organizational structure and the capabilities and competencies of the applicant overall, describe the management structure and the staffing of the project, and then thirdly, discuss the role of various partners that will collaborate on the project's implementation. For the next selection criteria category, impact outcomes evaluation, sustainment, and the performance measures, there's a list of different bullets there which are directly from the solicitation, which include identifying the goals and objectives for program development, describe how the performance measures will be, how the performance of the project will be documented and monitored and evaluated, outline what data and information will be collected, and describe how the evaluation and collaborative partnerships will be leveraged to build long-term support and resources for the program, describe the process for assessing the project's effectiveness. And then as we continue on to the next page, three other ones, discuss how the role of the state or local correctional agencies who are going to be partnering with the program, discuss how the services provided under the project will be integrated into the overall reentry strategy, and then lastly, provide a plan for tracking participant outcomes for at least 12 months following release, and then describe the process for obtaining information about recidivism from relevant correctional agencies. The budget category under the selection criteria, just three simple things to remember. There's no match requirement under this solicitation or this program in comparison to some of the other sections of the Second Chance Act. The budget needs to be clear, detailed, cost-effective, and complete, and make sure that all the expenses are reliable regarding what is already in the solicitation. And then the applicant should budget for 3 staff members to attend 2 3-day meetings in Washington, D.C., which would potentially include the Second Chance Act conference if you are awarded. Regarding the performance measures, there's a couple of examples in the solicitation chart. Please note that these metrics, they're just examples. There is a hyperlink that you'll see in the webinar that you can access, which has more detail. And then also, if you are awarded, you will receive training on the different performance measures for this solicitation. There's a slide in here that we put near the end. It's on the basic minimum requirements. And we put this in there because you need to be aware that all the applications that are submitted, there's basic information that you must submit in your package. And if you have not submitted that, if you did not submit that information, what's going to happen is your application is going to be kicked out, what we call it the BMR level, and it will not go to peer review. So under this solicitation, the things that BJ has considered to be critical elements are that the application must include a project abstract. It must include program narrative information. It must thoroughly include a budget detail worksheet and a budget narrative, and this can be a combination of one document, but if it is submitted as one document, the document must include both the narrative, the program narrative, and the budget, it must include both the budget narrative and the budget detailed information. And then lastly, the MOA agreement, the memorandum of agreement that we discussed earlier, which shows basically like a binding partnership between the nonprofit organization and the correctional facility that will allow them to begin the work behind the walls. The next page is a list of required attachments. This is just something that's basic that that's in the solicitation. Won't go through that in detail. Project timeline, description of key personnel, MOA, agreement with the key partners, disclosure of pending application information. And then on to the next page. If you have any questions about the solicitation or any TA assistance that you might need, here's some information to assist you. You can contact grants.gov if you need technical assistance. If you need information on the solicitation itself, our first line of, I won't say first line of defense, but our first line is that you would contact our Justice Information Center or JIC, and what they'll do is we've kind of provided information on them in training so they're able to answer some of the questions. If it's something that they cannot answer themselves, then they will contact myself or Gary. So that's the contact information. Make sure I would basically just kind of print that page, keep it handy by your desk in case you have any questions before the solicitation closes on March 21st. The last two slides, there is a one-page slide for the National Reentry Resource Center with their web address. As I mentioned, if you have any interest in receiving other federal funding opportunities or just general reentry information, it's highly suggested that you take a visit to their website, register to receive their e-newsletter. There's a lot of information that they send out in terms of webinars, just national, general level types of reentry information that you might not be aware of. It's all archived. The webinars are archived as well. Our federal partners post on there. There's a sublink for the Second Chance Act. There's also some links for some community service treatment providers. For example, Gary and I also receive a lot of information and contact, as I indicated, from people who are still incarcerated. We often will either mail them some information or send that information to their loved ones. So there's some links on that website where you can actually access by zip code different service providers. For example, if the individuals return to Fairfax County, Virginia, put the zip code, you can designate the radius. For example, within a 50-mile radius, it will give you a listing of reentry services to assist those individuals. It's not, it's not mutually exclusive, but it's just a start to kind of get you going. And then the last page is the BJA website. You can also register with BJA to receive current updates on any program areas that we put out through our BJA Justice Today newsletter. So with that, I've taken up half the time, and we have half the time left for Q&A. So please go ahead and your questions.
We have quite a few questions that have come in already. Anyone who hasn't submitted a question, please type it into the Q&A box that's in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'll get to as many of them as we possibly can before 4:30 today. And I'm going to sort of cluster questions together when they're related to one another. So I guess the first question, we've got questions from people who are previous recipients who are interested in knowing if they are eligible to apply for funding, or maybe current recipients who received a 2011 or 2012 grantee. Are those folks eligible to apply under this solicitation? And then we've also received questions from people who do not currently have grants, who would like to know if there's any preference for people who have already received grants, if they'll be applying into the same pool and they'll be evaluated against each other.
Well, there is nothing that prohibits you from applying for this current funding stream if you received a previous adult mentoring award from us. Probably the reality is if you just received one last year in 2012, it could have some. It might be some notes, we might. Whether you receive another award since you just received one, and then the actual startup for those awards is always a little bit delayed. But if you receive like an award, for example, like in 2009, 2010, 2011, or even if you receive one last year, you can still apply. It's just going to be up to you since it's a competitive field, a competitive process. It's just going to be up to you to adhere to all the requirements, and then put anything else in your application that's going to strengthen your overall candidacy for receiving an award.
If we've got folks listening on the phone who are a community-based provider of a particular kind of treatment services or a particular kind of reentry service, could that single provider partner with many different mentoring organizations and be listed on several different applications that come in? Would they be penalized in any way for that?
No, I think certainly that type of provider could be a participant in several different applications. The applications, of course, would be judged on their individual merit, and I suppose it's possible that there might be two projects that were funded that the same provider was one of the subcontractors, but there's no prohibition against that.
Now, that might be different if we say, for example, Gary and I are with the Gary Jens Thurston Bryan nonprofit organization, and we apply like 5 times directly for this. That might be a little bit different versus coming in as a subcontractor.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, you would only submit, each applicant would only submit one application as the primary applicant that would actually receive the funds. But again, I interpreted the question to be that there would be a subcontractor that might be a part of 2 or 3 different applications.
Does this relate to there's new language in the solicitation about the kind of information that people have to disclose about other applications that they have pending with federal agencies? Is that limited strictly to the programs that they are themselves the primary applicant for, or is it also limited does it apply to organizations that might be subcontractors for other federal grants?
I would have to say that would only be an issue if there was a potential conflict of interest. But I'm not really sure, to be perfectly honest with you, where that stipulation is in the solicitation. But we certainly don't require folks to disclose if they're the recipient of any other federal funding, because these applications are judged on their individual merit and their responsiveness or lack of responsiveness to this particular solicitation. So the answer would be we don't expect a recitation of all the federal monies that a particular organization might be receiving or have received.
With regard to the Category 2 applicants focused on fatherhood and motherhood, must they be providing services to both fathers and mothers, or can they choose particularly to work with fathers or particularly to work with mothers?
It could be one or the other. Or there might be a program where they have individuals who are going to be engaged in both fatherhood/motherhood. So it could be motherhood or fatherhood individually, or it could be the case where, as I recall, we had some projects where they had several different, a certain amount of individuals who participate in the program, and then that were men and women, and so there was like a combination of both.
Okay, we've received quite a few questions about the requirements around both pre- and post-release services. Must every participant in a funded program receive both pre- and post-release services? Or is it possible for a grantee to enroll some participants who have already been released, or must they start with every participant prior to release?
Well, the reason we have that language in there is that when we kind of began these projects or these programs back in 2009, we often talk about how the reentry process is an overall process that begins when the individuals are actually behind the wall. So, as the requirements indicate, you need to be able to provide those services for all the individuals in the pre-release, and then continue that as they are released from the correctional facilities and then reintegrate back into society.
I think, however, the bulk of this would be on a pre-release basis. That's why Thurston mentioned earlier that we're now requiring not just a letter of support, but a memorandum of understanding where there's a firm commitment on the part of a local jail or State Department of Corrections to allow the grant recipient access to offenders pre-release. And this may be really for a couple of things. One, we would hope that the correctional agency would be doing a risk needs assessment so that they would be identifying people who were in a higher risk category to recidivate as a target population, and also the opportunity for a mentoring relationship to be established maybe a month, maybe 3 months prior to release. But we do anticipate that the bulk of the services that folks will provide will be in the community in the form of housing support or employment support or substance abuse treatment or mental health treatment once the person is released. So the emphasis is on post-release services, but there needs to be that relationship established, and hopefully, again, the incorporation of risk needs assessment in the pre-release part of the programs.
Right. So the programs need to include both the pre and the post-release components.
Okay. We have a whole host of questions about this, the memorandum of agreement that grantees should provide with their correctional partners. The language says a memorandum of agreement or something comparable. What else would be comparable in your eyes? Is there any other evidence of sort of a long-standing relationship with a correctional agency that an applicant could submit in place of an MOA if they can't get an MOA for some reason?
Well, I think that's going to be problematic because we're looking for not just a letter of support, but we're looking for firm commitment. So I suppose that if, for instance, a particular agency had a long-standing relationship with a local county jail, if they were to secure a letter of commitment from that particular organization that firmly stated that they would have access to offenders pre-release and that the sheriff is committed to working with them. Memorandums of understanding, memorandums of agreement, by their very nature, are less, what's the word I'm looking for, perhaps less complicated than a contract, but they are something that's more than just a general letter of support. And what we've found in the past is that folks who have applied for these grants have gotten a letter of support from a local jail, or they've gotten a letter of support from the Department of Corrections, and then when they got the grant, the corrections people said, "Oh well, we didn't really mean it. We won't let you actually come into the jail." So what we're looking for is that documented, firm commitment that the relationship exists and that they will be allowed to provide those, be involved on a pre-release basis. The actual form of that, I think, would be something that we'd have to make some individual value judgments about in terms of the level of commitment that we see in that document.
Yeah, I would go back and look on page 6 at the top of the solicitation. This is like one of the things that we've kind of observed, like as Gary indicated, having administered this program since 2009, and as Gary indicated, what we found was that there's some difficulties with the program participant level, et cetera, when the nonprofits did not have that memorandum of agreement or memorandum of understanding, however you want to call it. They did not have that more binding collaborative partnership and documentation. It was, as Gary indicated, they were having difficulty getting in the facility, and then that kind of sidetracked the overall project. So I would go back and look at that information on page 6 of the solicitation at the top.
Okay, so I am up to 92 questions at this point, so I'm going to apologize right now. I know we won't get through all of the rest of the 92 before 4:30, but we'll try to get through as many as possible. I'm going to go really quickly through a whole bunch of questions about eligible target populations. Are detainees eligible to be part of the target population program?
Yes.
So individuals who are incarcerated in a jail but have not been convicted?
Yes, they would be eligible.
Are probationers who have not been incarcerated, individuals on probation who are not in a jail?
No.
Is there any guidance about the number of clients per year that you'd like to see in an application? Or if not the number of clients, the cost per participant that you'd like to see in an application?
I mean, I think it would be to your advantage if you had that level of information where you can kind of quantify the cost associated with, the $300 award amount.
Yeah, I think Thurston's right. You really, the issue of bang for the buck. I mean, if you're talking about a $300,000 grant over a 2-year period and you only propose to serve 5 people, I think there could be a problem there. As far as any set level of, say, you have to do 50 or 75, no, because if you're working with a very high-risk population of people who really need some serious mental health services or substance abuse treatment or maybe some type of case management services around their living arrangements, those tend to be expensive. And so it may be that if you would only serve 25 clients like that over a period of a year because of the high level of resources that they need. So I think the projects are going to be judged on the basis of the level of services that they're providing and, again, the potential bang for the buck. But there are no set guidelines.
Is there a preference for programs that are working with, say, their entire target population comes out of a single facility, or would you rather have a program that is working with all of the individuals coming back to a community? I'm rolling together several questions about basically asking if there are any preferences in terms of what the target population looks like, whether it's a community, whether it's a specific facility. Is there any preference with regard to that?
No, I don't think so. For instance, it's possible that they might be working with 3 different state prisons and making visits there for folks that would be coming back to a particular community. But there's no preference given. I think it really depends on the geography and the capabilities of the particular applicant agency in terms of the relationship that they may or may not have with a correctional agency. So the answer is no, there's not going to be a preference.
Are there any offense parameters? Are there any people who won't be allowed to participate in the program because of their conviction history?
No.
Is there any preference for paid or unpaid mentors?
Not except that if you pay mentors, salaried folks, whatever, then that tends to eat your money up pretty quickly. But I think we would certainly look at the fact that you could have people that are employed part-time as mentors or volunteer mentors, or that might be compensated by giving them gas cards. So there's no bias against that. Again, it just would depend on the nature of the program design that someone came up with. It might be more effective to have 4 or 5 mentors that were somehow compensated as opposed to maybe 25 that were pure volunteers. But I don't think there's any guidelines there. There certainly wouldn't be any preference given either way. It's going to be based on the strength of the program design and how those mentors are going to be trained and supervised and utilized.
Is there any preference for group versus individual mentoring?
No.
If you are in a state that has individuals under the age of 18 charged and convicted as adults, could they be considered part of the target population if they come out before their 18th birthday?
That's an interesting question. I would think that if they had been convicted, committed, and they were serving their time in an adult prison, that they could be eligible as part of your target population.
Are there restrictions regarding what faith-based organizations may or may not do that folks should be aware of?
Well, I think it goes without saying that there has to be a separation between the church and state here. And so even though it may be a faith-based organization, we would certainly not want those folks proselytizing or evangelizing or whatever term that you want. There has to be the separation between the church and the state.
Are there any particular transitional services that you would expect to see programs providing? Are there any, should they be providing a range of transitional services, or are there specific things that they should prioritize?
Well, because of the relatively small nature of these grants, I mean, let's face it, $300,000 over a 2-year period, I would think that most of the private nonprofits would probably want to focus on a particular type of pre-release service. When we wrote the original solicitation 4 years ago, we really gave a lot of leeway there. We just said that there needs to be some type of recognized transitional service. It could be substance abuse counseling. It could be mental health services. It could be help and support in terms of case management services around housing or employment-related services. So it really would depend on the capabilities of the private nonprofit. If you had a more sophisticated, a larger private nonprofit like Goodwill Industries or Safer Foundation that had different components that could provide a range of transitional services, yeah, that would be good. But if you're talking about a smaller nonprofit they may want to maximize their resources by just focusing on providing, a limited nature of transitional services. But I don't think that there's an expectation that they would be all things to all people all the time.
Does the primary grant recipient, must they be providing mentoring, or could the primary grant recipient be a transitional service provider and they would subcontract with a mentoring organization to add that component to their program?
That would work. That would be fine. They could subcontract for the mentoring, or it could be vice versa.
Right. As long as the mentoring component is incorporated overall into the program that they are seeking funding for.
Okay. A couple of questions about the priority considerations. With regard to the first bullet on that slide, which asks that applicants include a plan to implement activities that have been demonstrated effective in facilitating the successful reentry of offenders. Are applicants limited to the information, sort of the guidelines that are available in Appendix 2? Can they draw upon their own program evaluations to provide evidence of the success of their strategies? Can they use anecdotal evidence? Or must they be drawing strictly from what appears on page 34 of the solicitation?
I think that the issue here is that those are examples of some elements of evidence-based programming, but we would not say that they would have to strictly rely on that. For instance, if their particular organization has been dependent on using cognitive-based therapy or something like that that has an established evidence base, or even if it's not necessarily something that has been documented with a lot of evidence from, let's say, the What Works Library that the National Reentry Resource Center, but it's a promising practice that they could point to, or maybe I like the idea that it would be something that maybe has been the success or the efficacy of it has been supported by an evaluation of their program. If the practices that they're using has indicated that there's some data to support the fact that what they're doing works. So there's some flexibility there. The idea is that people would look toward practices that there is some evidence to support the fact that they work, that they make, that they help to people to more successfully reenter society, and that it's not just some type of psych oil stuff, if you will.
Right, and what we're looking for, if you look at those examples, risk, need, responsivity, basically.
So the second priority consideration has to do with independent evaluation, random assignment, and control groups. Are applicants penalized in any way if they don't propose an independent evaluation that uses control groups?
That's a priority consideration overall, that bullet. It might be difficult for an agency to actually be, or organization to actually be able to have a independent evaluation, and then also being able to, for example, have enough clients to participate in random control. I think one of the things, though, is like if you can demonstrate or you have the capability of being able to perform an independent evaluation, if you look at the language under that bullet, it says, I think it says, where feasible or as feasible with the random control or the random assignment portion of that. So I would keep that in mind.
Well, to build on what Thurston's saying, too, I think what we're looking for is some evidence, some plan, if you will, for documenting the success of the project. And it could be a process assessment. It doesn't, as Thurston said, it doesn't have to be a random controlled trial because the project may not be large enough for that. But I certainly think that an applicant who has some type of a strategy or a plan determining the success of the project, that's going to strengthen the application. So it's there's no question that and if the applicants who are able to maybe have a contract or an agreement with someone from a local university to track their people, I mean, again, those are the kinds of things that strengthen applications and that result in higher peer review scores.
If an applicant is planning to conduct an independent evaluation, do you have any sense of how much money they should be setting aside in their budget to do that? Should it be closer to 5% of their budget, closer to 10%?
So there's no real rule of thumb there, but I think if I were to pull a figure sort of out of my hair, I would probably say somewhere in the neighborhood of 10%. That should be something that they should negotiate with whomever they had in mind. We understand that we want the bulk of this money to go toward providing services. So let me just go out on a limb and say that certainly 10% would be a reasonable amount to devote towards some type of a process assessment or evaluation.
We've had a whole host of questions regarding the baseline recidivism rate that grantees need to provide. Do they need to include the baseline recidivism rate in their application, or is that something that they developed on the road? The first part of the question. The second one is there any guidance as to how they should develop that baseline recidivism rate? Should it be based on individuals that they've served through their mentoring program in the past? Should they be focused on individuals of a similar risk level who are released from the same institution? Any suggestions about who should make up the populations for that baseline recidivism rate?
Well, I think that people should apply a rule of rationality to this. The idea of establishing some type of baseline recidivism rate is all about this is where you started. And so if you started here, for instance, if it were evident that people coming back into a particular urban area that the State Department of Corrections indicated that 35% of those folks normally would somehow reoffend or go back to prison within the first 2 years or whatever, then you could use that as a baseline recidivism rate. And if your program working with similar folks with similar characteristics at similar risk levels, if you were able to say, wow, only 20% of our people went back, that's the kind of success we're looking at. But the idea of establishing a baseline recidivism rate is just all about having that basis for judging whether what you're doing are making people better or enhancing their chances of staying out of prison. I've got to be honest with you, this is a major problem that we've run into nationally because there's no general agreement on a national definition of recidivism, and a lot of organizations, even state departments of corrections, have trouble being able to gather and maintain the data. So my advice would be that someone who's applying for this, they would try as effectively as they could, like Thurston said, do the best that they can to work with either the statistical department of a local jail or Department of Corrections or the State Department of Corrections to get some idea of the failure rate for those people that they're going to be working with, and then hopefully as a result of the project programmatic interventions, those people would not go back as often. I know this is a little circuitous, but I don't really know how to explain it otherwise. Thurston, do you have any ideas?
No, and make sure you include that information in your application, because that'll be one of the things we'll be looking for. I think Gary said it well.
But they should propose the baseline recidivism rate and write that into their application, what they believe it to be.
They should. And in fact, that's another situation where if they are able to document a baseline recidivism rate for their target population, that's going to be a big plus in terms of how their project is evaluated. Anyway,
we are running over time. I'm going to just ask two last questions that I know are fairly important to folks, and apologize to everyone else whose questions we didn't get to. The first is about the length of time. Do you expect grantees to work with participants for a particular length of time? And then, as a corollary to that, do you expect the mentoring relationship to last for a particular set of time? Should they be planning for a year, planning for 6 months? Do you have something particular in mind?
No, we have no particular time frames and time. That would just depend on the needs of the particular target population. I do think, however, that we've talked about anywhere from 1 to 3 months of building relationships pre-release. That might be weekly or monthly visits, but the short answer to the question is no. There are no time frame parameters. It's going to depend upon the structure of the program and the competency and capabilities of the applicant organization.
Last question, we've got a whole host of questions about sort of what are allowable expenses, and particularly with regard to incentives versus expenses. So I think you folks said earlier you can't provide gift cards or gas cards as rewards to participants as an incentive for successful completion of the program. Is it possible to reimburse mentors or participants if they are traveling to attend an event? Can you reimburse for, travel expenses if it's part of the mentoring program, or are all travel expenses excluded from reimbursement?
Well, no. I think as far as the staff is concerned, the federal guidelines incorporate per diem rates as well as mileage rates that the federal government would pay. So staff be reimbursed for mileage that they drive in delivering program services. It's also we've allowed in the past for offenders if they need to get to a job or something like that. It's clearly a part of their treatment of their program. Bus passes, metro subway tokens, or gas cards. Again, not as incentives or rewards, but as a means to an end for them to be able to get to treatment or to get to work. And we certainly absolutely discourage the use of any type of cash, anything like that. But the federal guidelines, I would encourage you to go online and you can access a copy of that through, I believe it's grants.gov, and see the federal guidelines are pretty clear about what's allowable and what isn't. Like, we can't pay for any type of construction. You can't buy vehicles. You can't buy property, real property. And so there's some restrictions.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for staying on the webinar for an extra 5 minutes. I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of the questions that came in, but we hope we were able to get to many of them. This webinar today has been recorded. The recording will be available on our website within a few days. Each of you who registered for the webinar will receive an email when the recording is available that gives you a link to where you can access it. The slides themselves are available at a link that appears in the chat box on the screen. That link will also be emailed to you within the next few days, and you'll be able to find those on our website right after the webinar today. I also can tell you, for those of you who didn't get your answers to all of your questions during today's webinar, there's a frequently asked questions document that will be posted soon that addresses many of the questions that came in that we weren't able to get to today, pertaining to allowable expenses, target population, specific items that you have to budget for, parameters around who you can and can't enroll in your programs. And so if we weren't able to hit your questions, those should be available in an FAQ document that will be posted on the BJA website relatively soon. I'm going to, when we close out the webinar today, I'm going to put back up the screen that provides contact information in case you have further questions about the grant application. I want to give a great big thank you to Dr. Gary Dennis and Thurston Bryant for co-hosting today's webinar and helping to put together the information and taking time aside to participate in today's webinar.
And
thank you very much.
And thank you, Leah and Sean, for setting this up. We're always grateful to our partners at CSG who have been with us for several years, and we couldn't have asked for better partners with all the different activities that we have. It makes our job a whole lot easier. Again, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to participate and listening on the webinar. If you have any questions, I think as Leah's going to put up that page for technical assistance, or if you have any other questions, you can contact our Justice Information Center. And as I indicated, if there's something that they cannot answer themselves, they will forward it over to Gary and myself. So again, I want to take the time to say thank you, and also keep in mind that the 2 pages of the slides where we kind of talked about some potentially alternate funding streams to kind of keep as many opportunities open as possible. And then if you have any interest in juvenile-related projects, please contact our Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. So, again, thank you, Leah, Sean, and CSG, and for all of you for listening in, and we look forward to your submissions under this solicitation by March the 25th, please. Just one more thing, though. If you are going to submit an application, March 21st, correction. Please ensure that you submit the application well in advance of March 21st, because what oftentimes happens is there are specific reasonings that will allow you to submit your application after the solicitation officially closes on March 21st. And sometimes some of the reasons that you might have are not going to be the reasons that leadership might allow you to actually submit that application. So please ensure you go ahead and start the process now. Get your application in ahead of time before March 21st. If you find that there's something that you forgot to attach, you can always resubmit your application as long as it's before the deadline. And then what we do here is that the most recent one is the one that we will keep. The older one will be discarded as a duplicate. So go ahead and get those applications in now. So again, thank you, and we will be here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.